Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel, I Hate Rock Music. And today I'm going to kind of get back to my bread and butter, which is obscure bands from the 60s and 70s and some lost gems. And that music really resonates with me. I grew up in the late 60s and in the 70s. And so that type of music really resonates with me a lot. And I discovered all kinds of really awesome, obscure gems in cutout bins. But of course, there was a lot of things that came out on import that I never got to hear until later in my life. But I love the originality and unusual qualities of a lot of these bands. And you can't find a more original, unusual band than Sweet Slag. They were together from 1968 to 1971, and in 1971 issued their single album Tracking with Close-Ups on the obscure President label. And I've read a lot of reviewers talk about the band and they're not that impressed or um, don't think it's that good. I'm really shocked. I think it's one of the coolest records and definitely pretty obscure. And it was Mike Kerensky on lead guitar, Paul Joly on soprano and alto saxophone, clarinet, flute, and oboe, Jack O'Neill on bass guitar and trombone, and Al Chambers on percussion. And I'm struck right away because their material, their rock material, is so original. But the thing that's really striking about them is the jazz elements. And there's a lot of really heavy jazz elements in the record. And Mick Kerensky is an incredible guitar player. I can see why a lot of people were impressed by him at the time. Um, Definitely uses a lot of interesting chord progressions, uses a really original riffs in their rock material and then does lead work that definitely qualifies as jazz. In a lot of ways, they don't sound anything like Pato, but they strike me in the same way that they're a rock band that was fully capable of doing jazz. And it's very convincing. A lot of their tunes start out as rock tunes and then evolve into lengthy jams with amazing guitar work and definitely a great jazz feel and the addition of the saxophone player really makes it very convincing, and it's added at the right places and really adds a nice touch. But the tracks that are long that evolve into jazz jams are very convincing. The rhythm section is great, particularly the bass player. I've rarely heard a lot of bass players in that area playing chords on bass, and so when they get into their jams, they're pretty solid and thick because you have a bass player playing bass chords, and then this incredible guitar player. And they used to play with a lot of the big bands, including Black Sabbath, as they've mentioned. And there's one billing that I saw posted that has in 1971 they played with Edgar Broughton Band, the Groundhogs, and High Tide. What an astonishing bill that would be. I would have been in heaven that night to see these four bands playing together in so much original music. And they say they're influenced by Beefheart and Zappa and that sort of thing, but I don't really hear that much Beefheart and Zappa, but I do hear flashes, just little tidbits that kind of remind me of some moments in Jethro Tull. There's some moments in the jamming that kind of remind me of King Crimson. And so there's a lot going on there. The vocals are unique and convincing, nothing outrageous. They don't need a front man when they play music this great. And so that single album was issued in 1971, Tracking with Close-Ups, and they recorded it in 2 days. And little research says that there's a bunch more in the vault, but nobody seems to know where it is, although one outtake from the sessions, Flavor of Decay, showed up on a UK compilation. So somebody out there knows where some of this other material is. And apparently they were well received when they played live. A couple of instances where the audience was very enthusiastic. I can only imagine they were a great live band. Reportedly, they were loud, but not too loud because they wanted to be able to hear what everybody was doing, and that makes sense because a lot of the music is pretty complex. and you'd really have to be able to hear what everyone else is doing. But the drummer Keith Edwards ended up in a band called Sensations Fix, and the oh sorry the soprano sax player Paul Jolie ended up in a 1980s band called Mummy, which is a free jazz band with Lowell Colehill, and that makes a lot of sense that he would end up going in that direction. But as I said, I'm not sure what people are not hearing when they listen to this record. I think it's one of the most original bands that I've heard of that era, and that's really saying something because there's a lot of really interesting original bands of that era. But just that putting that jazz element in there really seems to be something really special. In fact, the original title of the album was going to be Guerrilla Jazz Rock, and that's a great description of it, guerrilla jazz rock. And as I've mentioned before, there's bands who are jazz rock, and then there's bands who are rock jazz. And Pato would be a rock band that has a lot of jazz elements, and this band is definitely another rock band that has jazz elements. And so I'm thrilled to hear it. And then especially having a guitar player that's that exceptional, I'm really surprised that he didn't end up in a band that was very successful because he's one of the most interesting guitar players that I've heard of that period. And once again, that's saying something. There's a lot of really interesting, cool, uh, original guitar players in that era and so many cool bands. And this record still stands out to me. So don't ignore some of these bad reviews out there and check it out. I'll put the material below and see what you think. But I think Sweet Slag is one of the great lost discoveries of that era, and we're blessed to have this album. And maybe someday some more material will appear, which would be great. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.